Hi, I'm Dr. Amy Robbins, and welcome to Life, Death, and the Space Between. I'm always looking to introduce you to different modalities of healing and treatment, and today's podcast is an episode on tapping, or emotional freedom technique. It's actually a technique I've used in my practice. It's a form of energy psychology, which is the Association for Comprehensive Energy Psychology. Say that a few times, it's a tongue twister, which is where I received my training in level 1 tapping. Tapping is a way of moving energy through your body when there are stuck emotions. And I was so interested in today's episode because I have both an energy medicine healer and also a clinical psychologist. Donna Eden is the author of Energy Medicine, and she's treated over 10,000 individual clients and taught hundreds of classes speaking on energy medicine. Her husband, who she's been married to for 47 years, and if you have an opportunity to watch this episode, check it out because seeing them together is actually quite adorable. And you can tell why energy medicine helps because they both look significantly younger than they are. And David Feinstein is a PhD. He's a clinical psychologist and he served on the faculty of the Johns Hopkins University School of Medicine. So he also has this background in science. He meets Donna, who has a background in energy medicine, starting with her ability to heal herself through some incredible, severe illnesses. And together, they come to understand the importance of energy psychology, energy medicine in this field of healing. So make sure you listen to the entire episode. We really dig into looking through the lens of like a specific person, kind of how tapping works and how it helps transform and how you really get to the root of what's going on with you, but also how you can heal just through straight energy and shifting energy and how this is a modality you can use on your own. So enjoy this episode with Donna and David. It has been about 5 years in the making. You have heard me talk about the waitlist for my course. You have heard me talk about my workshops, but now the doors to live your life backwards, awaken your essence are finally open. This is an 8-week transformational program that takes you from feeling disconnected, disempowered, and disenchanted with your life to living a connected, empowered, and enchanted life that is in complete alignment with your soul. So this is the program that for me has been a culmination of all the work I've done from the psychological side, from the spiritual side, bringing it all together to you, putting together what I think are the best practices in both psychology and spirituality, helping you use the lens of death to awaken to your essence. It is an incredibly robust and full course. It includes many modules. There's 8 modules, as well as weekly group coaching from me, an hour and a half a week. And it is truly a transformational experience. If you are interested and want to hear more, the information is on my website. You can check out the information there. There'll be a link in the show notes as well for you to check out more information about the course, when it's starting. The doors are only open for the next 2 weeks. And then it is a small cohort. So this is not open to like thousands of people. It's only open to about 20 and it's already starting to fill up. So make sure if you are interested that you check the link in the show notes and register now. Welcome, David and Donna, to Life, Death, and the Space Between.
Thank you so much, Amy. We're sure looking forward to talking with you.
Yep, we're happy to be here.
So we are talking today about a treatment modality that I have started incorporating into my clinical work. And so I'm so excited to have both of you as real experts in this space talking about tapping. But before we start with tapping, can we discuss first what energy psychology is and kind of that broad brush definition, because tapping falls in that in that space of energy psychology, which I think a lot of people, even in the psychological space, have never heard about before.
Right. That's a great beginning, because tapping is part of energy psychology. Energy psychology is an umbrella term that includes emotional freedom techniques, thought field therapy, aura-based therapies, chakra-based therapies. So they're all there. But the one that has really gotten researched is EFT, emotional freedom technique. So that's kind of the one everybody's using, because it's gotten the research, it's gotten popular. And but to take your question up a level, energy psychology is part of energy medicine. So in the same way that psychiatry is part of general medicine, energy psychology is part of energy medicine. And energy medicine is a term really that Donna popularized, and that when her book came out in 1999, almost no one was using that term, and now everybody's using that term. So you might want to hear from Donna about how she came into energy medicine.
Yeah, I'd love to know, because this is really, I mean, late 1990s.
Well, actually, it was in the 1970s that I came into it. And I came into it because I had been sick with multiple sclerosis since I was 16. And by the time I was in my late 20s, I had a heart attack. I could hardly walk. Sometimes I didn't walk at all. And I also had tetany, which is that sense of everything going to sleep all over your body, or your hands falling asleep. It was everywhere on my body. So sometimes I couldn't talk. And then I went to see 5 different specialists, and they all said they couldn't help me. That there was no real cure for multiple sclerosis. So I had to sort of swallow that, and that I was terminal because my organs were breaking down. And so
that's why she had the heart attack at 27.
Yeah, I had a heart attack at 27.
So for anybody who's just listening and not watching, if you were looking at Donna right now, I don't know how old you are, but for someone who's had multiple sclerosis since a young age, to look at you now, I mean, you look like you could be 50.
Well, I'm 81.
No way.
Yes, I am. Yes, I am.
No. Okay. I want whatever you're doing. So bring it to us now. Tell us everything.
That's energy medicine. Energy medicine. I have watched people who have studied with me for as much as 30 years get younger as they've gotten older. Because if you know how to move the energies inside of you or around you, you will always be in sync with your natural healing and your natural energies, and you've got vitality, and you age better. You age better. And when things do happen to you, you know what to do for yourself.
Okay, David, you look fantastic too. I don't know how old you are.
Yeah, but I must say, I'm so proud of my daughter.
120. What is it?
She stole me from the cradle 47 years ago. I'm only 77.
Okay. Well, you both look incredible. So we want your secrets. I know people now are going to be searching to try to find what you look like, as they should, because it is no lie here. Okay. So you have multiple sclerosis. You have this heart attack at 27. And then what happens as a result of that?
Well, when I saw 5 different specialists who said there was no way I was going to get well. So I went home and I started experimenting on myself with energy, because that was the only thing I really knew was energy. And the first thing...
Say a little bit more about when you say it's the only thing you knew. You have a different relationship with energy than many people.
Well, I was 20 years old before I found out that the rest of the world didn't see energy. I just thought everybody did. And but in my family, my mother did, my brother and my sister did. Only my father didn't, and we all felt sorry for him because we didn't know how he functioned. But I also am very sure that every child born sees energy. And if you've ever picked up a baby and they're looking all around your head, I mean, they're looking at your aura, but if nobody keeps it alive in that first year of life, it goes dormant. Anyway, my mom kept it alive because that's what she saw and just talked about it a lot. So I went home and began experimenting with my own energies. And the first thing I did was put one hand on my knee and one hand up above, just above my leg. And I noticed that it only took about 3 minutes for that energy to connect. And it was, oh, and my thoughts were at the time, oh, I'm just going to heal myself. This is going to be simple. It took longer than that, but very quickly, I had also was allergic to everything under the sun. I couldn't eat anything. Suddenly, I could eat things I'd never eaten before in my life, and I wasn't having any reactions. When I was a teenager, I ended up in the hospital from insulin shock, from and going into a coma from just being so highly allergic. Well, I make a long story short, I'm not allergic to anything anymore, and then what happened after that? Oh, my asthma went away. I had asthma and it went away. And the last thing that fell into line, but very quickly, just in little pieces, parts of symptoms of my MS began to recede and go away. And in all, it took between 1.5 to 2 years for everything to be gone. But it was simple. I just kept working with my energy. That's all.
But what I think is important to say is that even though you had this gift of seeing energy, it never occurred to you to use it for healing.
No.
So this was the first time. And
I was my first subject.
And in those 1.5 to 2 years, she really invented the system that she's been teaching now because you felt really strongly that.
Well, that everybody on this planet can heal themselves, and people needed to know, and somehow we lost that awareness and that understanding. And so I was passionate. I still am passionate that people know what they can do to get better, with regardless of what their thing is. You know, whether it's heart or cancer or whatever it is.
So how did you start putting together a modality of treatment? What was that for you? And then how did that move into what we're now talking about today, which is emotional freedom technique or tapping? Those two words, by the way, for people are interchangeable.
Okay. Well, I mean, it was a lot of things, but one of the first things for me was I tend to scramble if I get stressed. And I realized I was scrambled all the time. I'm scrambled by energy just wasn't flowing as it was meant to. My brain didn't work real well, things like that. So I knew that before I could get well with MS, I had to straighten out that scramble so that energy could travel to where it was meant to travel. And so that was the modalities. I began figuring out what were the things I could do to make sure that everything would straighten out and that my brain would work again better. And that's what I did. I made a whole system called the daily energy routine just to get yourself just in sync and everything's flowing well. And so I did that. And then I found that places in my body where the energy wasn't connecting up, I figured out how to hold different places to make it connect up. I mean, it was just a series of trial and error, and until it all worked.
And I got into energy medicine through marriage.
Yeah, that was my question, because you were on faculty at Johns Hopkins.
I was.
At University of Medical
School.
At the medical school.
Right, for 7 years, right before I met Donna. When I met Donna when I was 30 years old in 1977. This is our month of our 47th anniversary.
Happy anniversary.
Thank you.
And so I had a more conventional understanding of energy, that energy has specific properties. You think of energy in terms of wavelengths and frequencies and the ability to affect matter, ability to, quote, do work. Energy is able to do work. This gal is talking about energies that have memory energies that have intelligence. This was totally off my radar. I thought she was a little crazy, but but she was cute, you know. So, but what really what I couldn't deny, because when I met her, she had just overcome her MS. It was the end of that 2-year period, and she was starting her practice right after I met her, and in fact I went to her first class. She had just decided to do a class, and since she'd never done a class before, she charged $5 for the weekend, and she promised that people could have their money back if they weren't satisfied, because she'd never taught this before. So I was the only one that wanted his money back.
And there's something about that. He was the only skeptic in the whole class.
I mean, I wasn't trying to be skeptical. I was just trying to get the questions answered that I didn't understand. And so as our relationship grew, I began to see people coming to her. I had, we were in Ashland, Oregon at the time, and I had my clinical psychology practice there in one building. Then there was an alleyway in the back of our building that led straight to another street where Donna had her practice. And I was seeing people going in and coming out better. People were coming from all over the world and really getting help. And I could not deny that. So I got more and more interested in what she was doing. And finally, as she was getting some prominence, people were asking her to write a book. And she didn't want to write a book. You know, how do you capture these kind of organic techniques that you invent with each client into a book? But I'm very left brain, and I thought I could help her with that. So we took, in 1997, we brought our practices down to half time, and we wrote the book together. And I just would ask her questions, really hard questions. When I was at Hopkins, one of my research projects was to look at the new therapies that were coming up. There were more than 200 new therapies that had emerged by that time, the early 70s. And the chair of the department put me on this special project to look at some of them. Are there things that we need to know about here at Hopkins, which is at the time was the #1 psychiatry department in the world, and he didn't want the world to kind of get ahead of him. So that was my job. So I was asking these, innovators and promoters of these new therapies like transactional analysis and primal scream and Gestalt. I was asking them really hard questions. And because what he told me to do is he said, what is old wine and new skin? What is more California fluff? And what are genuine innovations we need to know about here at Hopkins? So I was asking really tough questions, and I brought that same skill to our writing of the book. I asked her really hard questions about energy, and what I found out was that she could answer everything I posed, because she was very empirical. You never look at her and think she's empirical, but she is really, and she works empirically. That is, empirical means observation, experimentation. Observe, experiment. So her observation was something I could not directly replicate. That is, she could see the energy. But she would look at a client on her table and she would say, okay, the chakra is out of balance here. This meridian is blocked here. And she would devise ways to make a difference, to correct that imbalance or blockage. And she would try something and she would see, did it work? And if it worked, great, on to the next. If it didn't work, then okay, that experiment didn't work. What else could we do? Okay, this meridian seems to be blocked in some way that isn't being fixed in the easiest ways. What else might it be? Oh, okay, right here in the aura, there is this kind of cloudy energy that's going right into the meridian. Maybe that's what it needs. So she fix the aura, she balance the aura, get it clean. Then it was very easy to fix the meridian. So that was her her whole way of working. And
very interesting to listen to him talk about my work.
Right, because I'm imagining for you it was very intuitive. You just
Yes.
kind of followed your way, and
exactly.
David's really like looking left brain, like what were the steps
Yeah.
that you took to make this happen? So, I have so many questions. How did your colleagues, I mean, you said you were at Hopkins 7 years, so I'm assuming maybe this, life took you on a different trajectory, but I'm very curious kind of how your colleagues responded, because I feel like energy medicine, while maybe more accepted, is still not really embraced in the traditional medical or the traditional psychological models of treatment.
Well, and that's particularly vehement with energy psychology right now, because energy psychology is making bigger claims than energy medicine is making. And energy psychology is hitting up against an established psychological orthodoxy that just cannot believe it. And I have no problem with their being skeptical, because I'll tell you, the first time I ever saw an energy psychology that was first introduced to it, I was still in Ashland, Oregon, and I was leading a supervision group of other therapists. And one of the therapists came in having just discovered this tapping therapy. And she was really excited about it and was telling the group about it. And I'm listening, and she's tapping on these points, and I'm thinking, what in the hell does that have to do with psychological growth? That's just, fantasy. And as a good psychologist, I went back and looked at the research. There was none. In 1997, 98, there was 0 peer-reviewed clinical trials showing that it worked. So I was, I was polite. I didn't just tell her she was stupid, but I kind of was thinking that as I steered her away from talking about it in my supervision group. And, it often happens that when you really judge something harshly like that, it winds up kicking you in the back. And so here I am talking to you as an advocate for what she was trying to show me. And, but shortly after that, our book came out on Donna's book on energy medicine. And the publisher put us on a 6-city tour where you go around. They don't do that so much anymore, but that was 1999, and in a way, we're still on that tour. We're more than 1,000 appearances later. We are still going around teaching this stuff. But way back there in around 2000, we were doing a workshop, and about 15% of the people that come to Donna's classes are psychotherapists who just know that working with the energies of depression or anxiety can help people beyond talk therapy. And they were starting to ask me about this tapping therapy, this energy psychology, this EFT, or also known as thought field therapy, which is the parent of EFT. And so I didn't know anything about it except for my initial judgments, and I had enough good sense to not just lead with those. So I knew, okay, I got to learn something about this. And just as I was thinking that, the opportunity arose. We did a weekend workshop in a city that it ended at noon, and one of the participants came up to me afterwards and said, I'm part of a group of my fellow psychologists in this city who meet every month, and we meet on Sunday nights, and we're meeting tonight, and the topic is the tapping therapies, and would you like to come as my guest? And I said, okay, I better go and find out something about this stuff. So I marched in with my skeptic's hat on, and it was at somebody's house, and there was about a dozen psychologists. And the way that they had set the evening up was that one of the therapists was learning the tapping therapies, and he was getting excited about it and putting it into his practice. So he invited the rest of the group, which was understandably as skeptical about it as I was, for one of them to invite one of his patients who wasn't responding. And so we have a dozen therapists, And the one doing the demonstration is in the middle of the room. The client is in the middle of the room in chairs facing each other, and then they're circled by the rest of us. So I'm watching and wondering how he's going to introduce this even. And the woman, he asked her about her symptoms, and she has had severe claustrophobia for as long as she can remember. Mm-hmm. She cannot go into an elevator. If she goes on a trip, she has to get those trucker maps that show the height of tunnels and the length of tunnels, because she cannot tolerate being in a long tunnel.
Wow.
And so so he's asking her about the history of that, and then he asks her about treatments, and she's tried various things, self-help. She's tried other things. She's been in therapy a couple times around it. This current therapist is not helping her.
I would imagine exposure therapy, right? To expose you to the
claustrophobia. Therapy would be one of the conventional ways of doing it. And, mm-hmm. and so, in fact, the therapist asked her to give a rating, to imagine being in an elevator, which was one of the situations that she talked about, and to give a rating of 0 to 10, the amount of distress she felt in this elevator. We know that even if you imagine something, it still gets the brain chemistry involved. So her amygdala goes into a threat response. And I'm familiar with all of this because, as you say, that method of, it's called the SUD, or subjective units of distress, 0 to 10, is used in many different kinds of therapy, including exposure therapy, including systematic desensitization, a form of exposure therapy that I was using. And so I'm very comfortable and say, okay, this guy isn't starting out looking too kooky.
Right. So just to explain to people real quick, you say on a scale of 0 to 10, how intense is whatever that feeling is, the anxiety,
exactly.
the sadness,
yeah.
And then they rate it because you've brought them psychologically to that state. You've told them to imagine themselves there, right?
Exactly.
And then you say, how distressing is this in this moment?
Yes. And for her, it went right up to a 10. She just had to think of an elevator, and she went into the reaction with the bodily reactions. And so this all seemed good and well. And then he starts using these strange incantations, having her tap on different parts of her body, saying, fear of elevators, fear of elevators, fear of elevators, fear of elevators. And I'm watching, and I'm saying, oh my God, he's just giving her post-hypnotic suggestions to embed the fear of elevators into her nervous system. This is malpractice. Do I have to report him? What am I seeing? What is this? And so he worked with her about 2 minutes doing this tapping and other things like circling her eyes and counting and humming, and God knows why, what is going on here? This is so outside of my repertoire as a psychologist that I'm really upset about it. I mean, I'm literally wondering, should I walk out? I can't support this. But after about 2 minutes of this, he asks her to imagine being in an elevator again and rate it again. And it's gone from a 10 down to a 7. And okay, what's happening? And so does another round, and it goes down to a 5 after 2 more minutes. And I'm thinking, okay, this must be some form of something like a Stockholm effect, where she's developed affection for him and doesn't want to embarrass him in front of his colleagues. And then another round, and it's back up to a 7. And so my skeptics had us saying, okay, I knew it wouldn't work. So these are just variations you get when you're doing it from a group. But he didn't stop with the 7. He asks her, what changed in your mind when it went from a 5 to a 7? And she says, oh, I had this memory from, I haven't remembered this for decades, but when I was about 8, I was playing with my 2 older brothers and some of their friends, and we had this big appliance carton, like what a refrigerator might come in. And one of us would get into it, and the others of us would push it. And it was great fun. And then when it came to be my turn, they pushed it against a wall with the only opening flaps being against the wall. And the brothers leave her there making some derisive remarks, and she is stuck. She's too light to actually find her way out of it, and she starts screaming. It's pitch dark, and she's screaming and she's screaming and screaming. And as she's relating it, she's clearly back up to a 10, and the therapist is just staying very focused with her. And pretty soon, he gets her to start tapping. And when the person is already activated like that, you don't need them to use words or images. You just tap, and you tap, tap, tap. And he has her tap. And what the tapping is doing, this is very important.
Yeah, this is what I was going to ask, is what exactly does the tapping do? And I know the points that you tap, but what is the meaning of the different points that you tap?
Right. Yeah. Well, there are several hundred acupuncture points on the skin. And acupuncture points have different electrical resistance than other spots on the skin. That is, they conduct electricity better. And many points have cells. Both acupuncture points and non-acupuncture points have cells, these large cells that when you apply pressure to them, they convert the pressure into electrical impulses. It's called mechanosensory transduction, and it's called piezoelectricity. That's not from energy psychology. That's physics and biology. So you tap on these points, they convert the pressure into electricity, and they are in areas of the skin that conduct electricity. Now, where does that electricity go? Where do those signals go? Where the signals go is to whatever parts of the brain were activated by the situation or by the imagery or the words. So for her amygdala, for instance, had gone into a big threat response. So it was going by remembering the scene. So she's in this threat response. But the tapping is attracting the signal that was generated. The tapping generates a signal that gets attracted to there, and acupuncture points will do what the body needs to bring better balance. So since this is an overreaction, hyper-arousal, it brings it down. It brings it down. So that electrical signal is bringing it down until she is able to calmly talk about the memory without being reactivated, without reliving it, which is one of the
without the emotional impulse.
Yes.
That it brings up for her.
Right. So she hasn't forgotten about it at all. It's just as vivid, possibly more vivid, but she can talk about it.
Before you go on, I just want to tell you what it shows for me when like if somebody's tapping here, I can see the pulsing of the energy go up to the brain. Wherever it is you're tapping, you can see first a spark, and then you can see it pulse. And sometimes, it's very often, that pulsing starts to go with the heartbeat. It's the same rhythm, and it's really most interesting. It's very biological and very wonderful, really.
So what you're really talking about here, I am no electrician, but I'm imagining a circuit board, and there's like a clip in the circuit board almost. And that when you tap, you're like unlocking that clip so the energy can flow through it more free and flow to the light bulb, let's say, to light it up.
Yeah.
That's a very simplified version of it.
Yes, that's good.
And what's really interesting about what Donna sees is there's the question of how does the signal generated by the tapping get to the part of the brain that needs it. So we know that attracts it. The way it gets it is exactly the way Donna described. But Donna described it because she sees it. The way that scientists are describing it now is that the connective tissue, the body's connective tissue, is how the signal is transported. And the body's connective tissue is made up of a good degree of collagen. Collagen is a semiconductor. So that signal goes almost instantly to wherever it's attracted. And that instant is important in tapping because you do see such rapid results. Whereas if it was going along the nervous system, it would be going synapse to neuron to synapse to neuron to synapse. So it would,
It much slower. Yeah.
Slower, and it would also lose a lot of the impulse. So it goes pretty rapidly without losing anything. And in 2002, there was a study at Harvard using ultrasound imagery that found a correspondence between the traditional maps of Chinese acupuncture meridians and the connective tissue. So that's exactly what Donna is seeing, is it just going up the meridian up to the amygdala and other parts of the limbic system.
So I have a couple of questions. One, I know that typically you say things while you're tapping. So can you describe a little bit about kind of the statements that are made and the purpose of those?
Right.
My other question is, I know that there are many tapping points you could tap. Sometimes you don't have to tap all of them. Is that correct?
Yes.
And then I had forgotten, and I'm so grateful for the reminder because I just started I don't do tapping a lot in my practice, but if someone's stuck on something and we've tried to talk through it every which way and we just can't seem to unstick it, I will bring in tapping as like, okay, let's tap it out. And so far I've worked with people where we've tapped through phobias of like performance anxiety, fear of being on stage, fear of like some relationship stuff, some trauma that we've worked through, like long time trauma. But I had forgotten about the eye movement piece. So one, I'm going to re-reference your book because I read all the books, but I did skim the part about tapping about the points because I was like, I know that. And now I'm like, oh, shoot, forgot the eye roll, look to the left, look to the right, like look down. Can you answer both of those pieces? What are the statements associated with it? And then what is the purpose of the eye movements? And do you need to tap every single point every single time in order to get the effects?
Right. Well, to start with the wording question, we can go back to our girl in the box. And so the therapist isn't even having her use any words. The client taps on themselves and they repeat the words. So the therapist feeds them the words and then they repeat them. So after she has calmed down, then he starts introducing words. And the words, one of the things that I love about tapping energy psychology is that the words are so flexible. You can go anywhere that you need to with the words. So he starts out with reminding her, it was a long time ago, I'm safe now. And so that is just kind of giving her suggestions that, you're tapping, it's like sending a signal into the nervous system. It just calms her. But then that wasn't enough, he felt. He felt that he wanted to really have a complete, kind of cure of her phobia. So he's working like you do with trauma, with an old trauma. And so this trauma has many aspects. So aspects are a very important part of energy psychology and EFT. So he identifies other aspects. So then he has her tapping on her anger and sense of betrayal at her brothers. He has her tapping on all the years that she lost of being free of this phobia. He has her tap on everything he can think of and that she can think of. And because a round of tapping only takes a couple of minutes, you're able to really address a lot of different aspects in one session. And so when she gets everything he can think of down to zero, SUD rate of zero, then he's able to go back to the elevator. And now the elevator is a 3. And she hasn't been working on the elevator, but just gone down. And very quickly, he's able to get that down to 0. And so this has all happened in about half an hour. And so we're all sitting there looking at it and kind of, I'm saying, should I believe my eyes or should I believe my beliefs? Because they're not matching very well. It's another cognitive dissonance for me. And then somebody says, well, we're in a house, there's a coat closet there. We could ask her to go into the coat closet. So the therapist very gently and consciously asks her if she'd be interested in doing that. And she is. And he says, you're not trying to prove anything to anybody right now. So we don't want to re-traumatize you. So if you feel even a little bit anxious, just open the door and come out. And so in she goes, closes the door, and half a minute goes by, and half a minute, actually a long time of silence. Imagine a dozen psychologists just hovering around looking at this closet door. A minute goes by, 2 minutes. It felt to me like about 3 minutes. It felt like a long time. And the therapist finally knocks on the door and says, are you okay? And she comes out and she's exuberant. She's just never expected anything like this. She is not feeling phobic or scared at all. And everybody's just kind of starts congratulating her, congratulating the therapist, except me. Sitting there saying, okay, I see what's going on. This is a social psychology experiment where they're looking at the gullibility of psychologists. This is somebody's doctoral dissertation. But it wasn't. And so like you, I've seen this happen time and time and time again, where there is a very quick resolution of a lifelong symptom. Now, it doesn't always happen in one session. If you're dealing with chronic depression, if you're dealing with severe PTSD, severe anxiety, often you'll need to do a lot more exploration. There'll be a lot more work that will happen one session after another. But in the first session, usually, if you can really get engaged with the individual, they will know that something is happening. It's something that they are that this is going to help them. To get to your second question of the eye movements, is that the basic formula, it's called the recipe, it's called the sandwich. And the sandwich is, the first part is you do about 8 to 12 tapping points, depending on the therapist has a different number. We'll get to that in a minute. So you have 8 to 12 tapping points. You do those while making a statement or bringing up a memory or an image. So you do that. Then in the middle of the sandwich, not necessarily the meat, but just time-wise it's in the middle, is what Roger Callahan called the 9 gamut procedure. And we call it the integration procedure, because you stop working on the issue. You've been intensely working on the issue. Now you stop it. And what I think happens is that you're giving the brain a chance to integrate the work that's been done so far. So the humming, followed by the counting, followed by the humming, that engages the right brain and the left brain. So you're kind of getting them actively talking to one another. You're doing eye movements that really trigger different parts of the brain. So you're just getting everything activated. And then the last part of the sandwich is another round of tapping. And then in the kind of recipe, the next step is to take another SUD rating. Did this change? And if it did change, great. But it also gives you clues, because that's where you can ask the person, well, okay, it went from, like in the woman's case, from 10 to a 7 after the first round. How do you still know it's a 7? What do you feel in your mind, body? What sensations are you feeling? What thoughts are you having? Because that becomes the focus of the next round of tapping, is whatever is keeping the person
right
up there. So,
and sometimes I notice too, if I give people space, like if I start to see an emotion come up, I'll just say, what's coming up for you right now? Put words to it, keep tapping. Like just allowing them to start saying what they're feeling will help move that.
exactly.
So let me ask this too. What is the difference now? There's this new modality that's, maybe it's not new, but it's a little bit more, getting a little bit more airtime, is brain spotting. So I want to know how tapping compares to brain spotting and how tapping compares to EMDR, which are, to me, kind of both maybe in the space, although you didn't mention EMDR as an energy psychology
right.
modality.
What brain spotting and EMDR and EFT have in common is that they're all somatic therapies. They're all bringing a somatic dimension into the therapy setting. Now, they also build on on more conventional ways of working with people. They all are interested in the person's history, but they go at it in very different ways. And brain spotting is I think the newest of them. I just heard David Grant give a keynote at the energy psychology convention.
Were you just there?
Yes.
Yeah, a colleague of mine was just there as well, who's taken on brain spotting for trauma and has been really just wowed by her own personal experience, but also working with clients.
Yes. So brain spotting is really paying attention to the position of different eye movements, and as the person rethinks a situation like a trauma, and it's I think David's done a really good job of turning it into a useful clinical modality, but it's not as new as it's touted in that. Donna, you've been doing that for at least 35 years.
Yeah.
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 Yeah. It's Donna's work is she doesn't distinguish between psychological benefits and physical benefits. She thinks it's just a package. You get the energy flowing and it helps both. And but it she taught me maybe 30 years ago that you explain it. What you do with the eyes and how it works.
Well, there's a whole lot of different things, but one thing is that, say, if somebody's really stuck and couldn't move in energy and they're psychologically distressed, I would literally take my finger up like above his eyes and have him look at my finger, and I would energy test to see if he'd lost strength, and they're just going to follow me wherever I go with my fingers. And there were certain places.
She's energy testing.
Okay, look up, David. Now he's fine, but if I find a place, he just loses his energy, and then there are places.
Fix me.
And there are places all over the head that I call neurovasculars, and those points on the head will bring the blood and the energy rushing through, and then he can look in that area, and he won't have lost.
Okay, let's do it.
Well, I've got to hold the voice.
Yeah.
Okay, I'll do these. And we're just going to hold these. Have you ever thrown your hand up to your forehead and said, "Oh my God," or something like that? I think there's something so instinctual about neurovasculars, because I'm sure that our ancient ancestors all knew them, and so you're going to think of, well, you're not thinking of anything, are you? Okay, it might, let's see if it's enough to see, it shifts. So suddenly he doesn't lose his strength when he looks in that direction anymore.
So you're holding your energy testing through his arm, through his fingers, or through
his whole arm. But I'm going to have him look in that direction. And does he lose strength?
Yeah.
And then,
and I wasn't dealing with an issue, but I was thinking about past trauma, and that's where the energy was lost, then getting the energy there again with my eyes in that position kind of does a healing of what's happening that also carries over into the memory.
Now, what about EMDR?
Yeah, go ahead and finish.
Well, I'll just finish this, is that when you get stressed, you can lose up to 80% of the blood in your forebrain. That is a lot. So it's hard to be able to think your way out of a paper bag. You can't. But if you get the blood back up there, suddenly you can think again, and the stress moves out of your body. Okay, you can answer about EMDR.
Yeah, so EMDR was really one of the very first somatic therapies in the new wave of somatic therapies. In the past, there have been many different things, bioenergetics, there was Rolfing, there was there's a book on somatic.
Is that it?
No, there's a book on somatic therapies that has like 20 or 30 that preceded EMDR, but EMDR really took off because Francine Shapiro was a psychologist who believed in research. And so she researched it and she demonstrated that this works. And the idea was very simple, that by moving the eyes in this kind of back and forth fashion while thinking of a trauma helps the brain reprocess the trauma. It's a very simple theory, very hard to demonstrate in the laboratory, but it was convincing because it worked. People knew it worked from their clinical experience, and they knew it worked from the research, from the clinical trials. But it got debunked in a way because it turned out that you could stimulate different parts of the body by tapping on them and get the same results. You didn't have to do anything with the eyes. And so that really, really messed up the theory. But
can I add one thing, David?
Yeah.
And for somebody like me, EMDR, because I was already scrambled in my energies, it scrambled me worse. So it didn't. So it's just one of those individual things. I mean, for most people, I think it did work, but for me, it just made me nuts.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So any therapy can have that. But to kind of try to get to your question is, do they have anything in common besides that they work with the body? What has happened with EMDR is that as the conventional kind of orthodox EMDR kind of lost its status, they started experimenting more, so that originally EMDR really couldn't be done on a self-help basis. But Francine Shapiro's last book was really giving it away to the public, so that here's what you can do on a self-help basis. So if you look at the trajectory of EMDR, it's gotten a lot more like energy psychology. Mm-hmm. And in fact, Michael Galvin, and I forget his co-author's name, wrote a book on EMDR and energy psychology, and that they really complement one another well. And what I've seen is, I mean, I don't know what happens when it goes in the other direction, but when EMDR people come to study energy psychology, they find that it's more flexible because of it's so conversant with words. They find that it really does lend people an opportunity to use it on a back-home basis, and they find that it's less likely to re-traumatize people, which doesn't usually happen with EMDR, but it's a little more
intricate,
going
maybe.
on a line.
Intricate. Yeah. Before we end today, what is the research supporting EFT or tapping?
Well,
why is it?
There was 0 studies in 1998 when I first got introduced to it. Since then, there have been more than 200 peer-reviewed clinical trials in American-speaking journals, and nearly 100 additional clinical trials in non-English speaking journals. And almost all of them, like more than 98% of them, have found a statistically significant improvement from pre-treatment to post-treatment in at least one of the targeted symptoms or reasons for change. So that's really a strong body of research, and it also more than half of them did follow up between 1 month and 2 years, averaging 7 months. And on this follow up, it was again, I think 79 of 81 follow up studies showed that at least one improvement held for that period of time. So it's a very strong basis. Now, you started out mentioning that don't psychologists have difficulty with this, and they still do. I just had a great achievement in 2023, one of the American Psychological Association's premium clinical journals published an article that I wrote on the research supporting energy psychology and with clinical recommendations. That milestone was short-lived. 3 of the top psychologists in the world, I mean, most prominent in the world, ripped it apart in a commentary that got published in the same journal. And it forced me to really look at the strength of the research. And what I had to conclude was that their whole attack, which it really was an attack, they called energy psychology an unsinkable rubber duck. It won't go away, but it's not the real thing. And that almost all of their argument was based on studies that were more than 20 years old. They were not up to date with the current research. So they were going from their paradigm, their belief system. They found the studies. So I was able to do a rejoinder to that was also published in the same journal that just took each of their arguments apart. So, but what the take home for me is that psychologists and other scientifically oriented therapists are not going to just swallow this up because we say it works. Mm-hmm. They're really going to need strong evidence, and there's always a need for more studies. So
and it's so interesting to me that why is the proof not in the pudding, right? Like if the evidence is that people are getting better.
Yes.
And I understand there's a need for randomly controlled trials, and I'm always skeptical of a lot of these psych studies because I went to college at a big university, and I know how some of these studies are conducted and, questionable right there. Like that, in order to get credit for a class, you have to show up to 5 graduate student psych studies and then you get your credit. I mean, so like right there, it's already a shaky model. And I know that that's not what you're specifically talking about here, because my guess is in some way these are randomized controlled trials and, certain people are put into them but all of that. But I still am always kind of a little bit skeptical in the psych space of what exactly those studies entailed and how participants were, drawn to the studies. My last question, Donna, for you is, what was my last question for you? Is you shifting and moving energy enough to shift and move energy for people? Or is your job of shifting and moving the energy for people, what you see and your ability to kind of open things up and move it, enough to shift and move the energy? Or does a person need to have knowledge and be able to acknowledge what needs to happen for them to move that energy, whether it be psychological or...
Energy will move. Our energies are electromagnetic. So if you align your own hand up, not touching your body, but just close to the body, it will move the energy. That energy is a part of every medical everything in the world. And so I believe that this next century, Western medicine will catch up with us. And that it will be more and more a part of the future because people are, and I've had many doctors come my way who realize they've come to the limit of what they can do. They know that there's something more. And I always remember many years ago when I was first getting into this and doing it, there was a man named
Brew Joy.
You got it. Brew Joy was his name. And he was a doctor who...
He's a surgeon.
A surgeon who began to experience chakras in the body. And he wrote a book about it. But it was like, that happens to more and more people who are in the field. I recently have connected up with somebody who... she's a wonderful therapist doing a different kind of energy work than me, but she was I don't know what her name was, but what she did was she worked with cadavers for 5 years. For 5 years, that was her work. And what she said, and what I noticed one day when I didn't mean to, I was starting to trip and I grabbed the foot and pulled it. And what I saw is it pulled all the way from the brain. And it just, I knew, what is Western medicine doing and not seeing these kind of connections? And she saw the nerves, and she saw everything in that moment, and her whole life changed. And so, now what was the question? I forgot where I'm going.
You answered it.
Oh, okay.
Can a practitioner make the difference without the person believing it or knowing it? Yeah.
One of my great fun things was when I had a practice for 23 or 24 years, and
before we went on the road.
And I loved it when a skeptic would come my way. First of all, I let them know they didn't have to pay me if it didn't work. And so it was really fun, and people who didn't.
She also married one of them.
Yes.
Right.
Yes. But I always got paid because it always worked. And I think energy work, whether it's just straight energy medicine, energy psychology, is one of the maybe most important things that people can do. I do.
Well, Donna and David, if people are interested in your work, where can they find you? Tell me so I can tell them where they can find exactly what you're doing. We'll have all of this in the show notes as always.
I appreciate that. Amy, for the energy psychology, there's a website called energytapping.com. For the energy medicine, there's a website called edenmethod.com. So energytapping.com, edenmethod.com.
You can also find it under energymedicine.com, either way.
Yeah.
Well, thank you both so much for your time today. This was fantastic. Everything I wanted it to be and more. So thank you.
Thank you. Okay. You're great, Amy. Okay.
Like what you heard today and want to hear more? Wondering what comes next and what it all means? Head over to Apple Podcast, Spotify, Stitcher, Google Play, or anywhere you get your podcasts and hit subscribe. Also, if you could take a minute to rate and review my podcast, I would really appreciate it. Stay tuned as we continue to explore life, death, and the space between.